Good afternoon and welcome everybody to the final session of our 2024 annual conference. This session's entitled How to Best Market to International Schools. My name is Rachel Rogers and I'm Head of Sales at ISC Research. So before I start the session today, just a quick bit of housekeeping. We will have an opportunity for questions at the end of this session. So if you think of a question as we're going through, do submit that via the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen, and we'll pick that up as we go through. If you have any technical issues, best thing to do is probably come out of the call and rejoin. If you continue to have any issues, do pop a message in and we will try and help you with those. And we are also recording this session. So the recording of the session will be available after the conference today in the community area. So one of the things we get asked often at ISC Research, because we work with such a wide variety of education suppliers, is how do you best market to international schools? And to help answer this critical question, please welcome our panel experts here with me today. We have Steve Whitley, Phil Redhead and Ian Hunter. Before I begin with the questions, I'll just do a quick introduction from each of them. Steve, do you want to give a quick intro for yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. Good afternoon, everybody, or good morning, depending on where you are in the world. My name's Steve Whitley. I'm the founder of EdTech Consulting. I help companies grow internationally, and a very large part of that of late has been with international schools.
Thanks, Steve. Phil?
Hi, everyone, from a steamy Dubai. It's very hot here. So my name is Phil Redhead. I've been out here in the region for 20 years now. This is my 20th year coming up August the 25th will be my anniversary. So I came out as a teacher. I've been a school leader, digital strategist in the public and private sector. I worked for GEMS for 11 years, leading digital strategy in GEMS. So I've primarily been a buyer of education supplies, especially EdTech, implemented a lot of EdTech in schools at national and school group level in the private sector as well. And over the past 6 years, I've kind of jumped over the fence and been working on the supplier side as well, helping businesses to meet the needs of international schools and the public sector as well.
Welcome to the dark side, Phil. I'm sure you've got quite a breadth of experience there to share today. And Ian.
Hi, everyone. I'm Ian Hunter. I'm the founder of Lime Education Consulting. So I've spent the last 27 years, I think, working in EdTech in one way, shape or form, usually always from a sales and marketing perspective. So I set up Lime Education Consulting just over a year ago, actually. And the purpose of that is to help EdTech companies grow from a sales and marketing perspective. That was initially intended to be within the UK and internationally, but I would argue that at the moment, 95% of my work is international, as that's where people are looking to grow. So, so I work with a number of companies, both from inside and outside the UK, to help them grow internationally.
And so, as you can see, we have quite a breadth of experience across the panel today. And as well as hosting, I myself have worked in EdTech for over 25 years now, and I am proof that you can keep your hair during this challenging market. So I'll kick off with the first question for today. So one of the key questions really is, how do suppliers get in front of international schools? And if I come to you first, Ian, for that one.
I think there are multiple ways. I think the likes of webinars, similar to what we're doing now. So if you are a company that has a product or a service that you want to get visibility to internationally, then certainly I think running webinars and drawing people towards those. Events certainly play a very significant part. I mean, where Phil is, you could probably go to an EdTech event every week rather, and still miss some. But actually, they're very, very good places to get in front of your future customers. And that might be sort of an event like BET, but it can equally be a membership organization event. So we'll probably come on to talk about membership organizations later. But where you get groups of schools coming together, or groups of potential candidates coming together. But I also think, you know, that just being in the region for either permanently or for a period of time to get that face-to-face contact is important.
Ian, anything from your side to add into that, Steve?
Yeah, agree with everything Ian's just said. I got a list of things here, and Ian's ticked off most of them. I would obviously say communication in terms of getting people to webinars. Yes, using the ISC database and doing outreach through that, but also social media, massively important nowadays. I would say in terms of the international school market, LinkedIn would probably be the top of the list of places that I'd want to have a very strong presence. Despite the best efforts of Mr. Musk, I'd also say X is a very good place to actually get that level of communication going. After that, Instagram, Facebook, etc., but they get more difficult to target the people that you actually want. And unfortunately, because we're talking education, it does tend to attract the extremes, both at the left and the right. So something like Facebook can be a very dangerous place to be talking about education.
Yeah, agreed. Thanks for that, Steve. And Phil, interesting to hear from your perspective, because obviously you've been on both sides of the fence. So what's your take on this?
Yeah, I mean, we at EdV, which is my company that we use as a vehicle to help companies to expand internationally. We operate on a basis of what we call the 7 Rs, and that this is the model that we have to construct a capability maturity matrix for companies to get into the market and to get in front of the right people. The first three, that the critical three really are around relevance, and then there's relationships and resilience. So the relevance is really critical, and it's where we start. The first step is to construct that clearly articulated, succinct and targeted value proposition. So when you do go to schools and you do the events and you get into the groups, whether it's on X or in the WhatsApp groups, which are very popular here, or you're in communities, you can very succinctly articulate what your value proposition is and make sure that that's converging with the school's needs. Now, relationships are built on trust. So it's critical, I believe, to find a partner who already has that credibility and trust in the region, whichever region you're aiming at, and can represent you at events and open the doors to get into the room, or get them into your room as well. Ian brought up the events, and I think we'll talk about channels and ways in. You either get into their room or you get them in your room. So it's quite, I mean, this has been a fantastic event as well. And there's, you know, we all know about the international events. However, it can be really, really impactful to run your own events as well. And you don't have to be huge. You know, you don't have to be Apple or Microsoft to run your own event. You can host them in schools, build the trust up with a school community, and you can do it at very low cost to draw people in, to create that credibility around the product. So you go beyond the product. So I think hosting your own events is really, really high impact, and creating that value beyond the product. So you're part of the community, you're seen as trusted. You're not just selling a product and trying to make money from the sector.
You've all brought up some interesting points there. I'm just following up on that one, Phil, about events, whether they're your own or external conferences, exhibitions, etc. Do you feel there is more importance on meeting with schools face to face, or is virtually just as valuable? Obviously, since COVID, we've all got much more familiar with online meetings, webinars, etc.
Yeah, it's always best face to face. I think blended is realistic, but again, you know, building those relationships is critical. And certainly in this region, you have to drink an awful lot of coffee, especially in places like Saudi Arabia. You don't sell it unless you've invented the iPhone. You're unlikely to be selling in the first week or even first few months. You have to build that trust. You know, if you go out to the Far East, a lot of the early conversations are personal, and it's building that relationship. So face to face is critical, and having a team on the ground or representatives on the ground to sustain that relationship is critical.
Yeah. And so, what is it that schools want to hear from us? How do we build that trust and those relationships? Can I come to you for that one, Steve?
Sure. I mean, I think Phil covered it very well. It's all about the relationships, and they don't just want to hear a sales pitch. So, if all you're ever doing is blasting out messages about what a great product you've got or what a great service you're offering, yeah, people are just going to ignore it. They're just going to go straight past it. So, what you really need to do is build that trust and build that relationship, even if you're just talking about what you're messaging on X. So, post things, interesting education news, things that teachers might actually want to stop and read, and then over time they'll begin to see you as a trusted and reliable source of information, which goes towards building that relationship. And hopefully at some point they go, so what is it you guys do? And that's really your opening point. So I always say, if you're going on X, for every 5 posts you make, at the most, one of them should be a salesy type thing. The other 4 should be not salesy. I think one of the ways that you can quite often get in is through research. Teachers are always interested in research and what's happening out there. So definitely, if you've got any sort of research onto your product or service, then use that to its full extent. By the side of that goes evidence. If you've got any evidence, and not just about your product, but about the whole sort of area that you're working in. So if you're doing phonics, any research or evidence on phonics that doesn't have to mention your product, but just get that out there, because it will get people interested in what you're saying. Coming slightly more to your product, testimonials. Clearly, testimonials have a strong impact, reviews and testimonials particularly. And if you're talking about international schools, testimonials from other international schools will be much more regarded than a testimonial from, say, a standard UK state school. That does lead you into chicken and egg. You've got to build a relationship, get the product out there, get some trialing done, get some testimonials, and then piggyback on that to actually grow your sales. So as Phil said, it does not happen overnight. It is all about building those relationships, and it takes time.
Steve, is that similar experience for yourself, Ian? So now, obviously, you work with lots of variety of companies as well.
Yeah, and I would just build on. I agree with everything that's been said on that subject, and build on it. Really, I think in some cases it comes down to working out what problem that the school has that you're trying to solve, or what challenge are you addressing that they don't know they have yet. I think we've all spent time building our relationships and our networks. I think we talk already quite a lot in the first part of this around relationships and trust. I think what companies want from us is us using our network for their benefit as well. So where we've seen examples of things that genuinely make a difference, then we tell them. I've had this almost sounds like I'm doing myself down here, but I've had sort of friendships or relationships with head teachers internationally for years and never sold them a thing. Now, actually, that's no bad thing, because they know when you take them something that is going to make a difference, that they trust your judgment. And so I think it's broadening out that. One of the things that I think each of us does in a different way is accelerate that route to market, by calling upon those networks, those relationships, to be able to promote. I kind of work on a very basic set of principles that, are we saving teachers or head teachers time? Are we saving them money? Or are we solving a problem that they've got? And I think if you're genuinely doing that, any one of those things, then they will listen. It's not always easy to get your message over. So the stories that you're telling have to be impactful. And therefore, how do you get them over? Well, you kind of do that through your network or other people's networks.
Absolutely. I think you touch on some key points there, don't you, really, about the integrity that you need to have to work in this market, because people are there, they work in the sector for a long time, and you do build those relationships up, don't you? So it's key that, you're meeting their needs as and when they arise from their perspective. Anything else to add from your side there, Phil?
Yeah, it is about knowing the customer's true priorities, and finding, what they want to hear. Is the relevance for solving a problem, like has been said. That I mean, this opens up a fascinating sort of challenge in terms of what those priorities are and navigating your way through the organization. So it might be, a later question, but it's most companies do most things very well and meet these challenges well. But I think there is a gap in how much time is invested on the supplier side in truly knowing the customer. So there are very few that I see actually create for each customer or group of schools or ministry or country a stakeholder power interest matrix to make sure that they're armed with the real data to navigate through the sales process. And it's critical because every organization is different. It can depend at a school, for example, on the principal's approach to leadership and to what extent leadership is distributed through the school. So when you're looking for the true decision maker to save time and a whole world of pain, you need to map out these conversations and who wants to hear what, and invest some time in training staff in business chemistry and emotional intelligence and knowing who they're talking to, and really developing the sales team into coaches to find out to listen rather than to sell. So creating that power interest matrix, and I literally mean for every customer. It doesn't have to be, a huge document, and technology can help, AI can help, but it is about human intelligence and finding out on the ground before you go into the sales conversation, how much do you already know? Using that conversation to find out what you don't know. You can go months, and especially, young sales staff tend to overestimate what they've got in terms of an opportunity. So we see crazily weighted pipelines because they've had a good conversation with one teacher and they think this is the sale. And then everybody blames the sales team when it doesn't come through. When actually it's because they weren't armed with the data to navigate through. So you have to identify the blockers. So finding out not just what the schools want, but who the key players are, and navigating that journey through to the final decision maker, because you can spend months and then have it fall at the last hurdle if you don't do that.
Would you say typically there is a best person to target within a school, or is that going to vary from school to school and depending on what you're taking to them?
Yeah, unfortunately, you have to find out school to school. So, you can't, and the challenge is exacerbated by the fact that, even the final decision makers, they might come across, it could be the principal or someone high up in a group of schools at corporate level. They could portray themselves as innovators and integrators, but when the rubber hits the road and it comes to signing the contract, really they're probably guardians,
yeah,
or even drivers or guardians. So you need to know who you're dealing with and where the challenges lie. Otherwise, you're just going to waste a whole lot of time and cost and energy, and your sales team are going to take the brunt of it.
Yes, it's quite a complex area to kind of navigate through. And are there best channels to communicate with the different decision makers within a school, or should you use different channels for different people that you're targeting? Can I get your input on that, Steve?
Sure. I mean, it's not just that it varies across every school. I think it varies quite significantly on the product or the service that you're offering. My experience of 40 odd years in education is I was selling into a very niche market within a niche market, i.e. STEM products to science teachers. And so from my perspective, my initial approach had to be to the science teacher. I knew that they were not the purse string holder generally, and that it would have to get kicked further up the line to get somebody to actually sign off on the purchase. But until I could get the scientist to say, you know what, I really want this in my classroom, I didn't even have a starting point with the higher echelons of the organization. So the marketing was almost two-pronged. At one level, I was addressing a teacher with some fairly science sort of centric messaging of how they could improve the teaching of their science, whilst at a higher level, starting to go in at the group level or at the principal level and talking about how we could improve their results, improve their scores within the environment that they're in. And it's one thing I would say as an absolute tip: when you're dealing with international schools, bear in mind that they are, at the end of the day, commercial organisations, and they always want to be better than the school just down the road from them. And you can actually use that to your advantage when communicating, at sort of principal level or finance level. So I would say there's definitely a different approach depending on the product or service, and then going to different people. If you're offering an MIS service, well, then you don't need to go and talk to a curriculum, the sort of person within the school. You probably are going in at that higher level because it's a cross-school decision. But unfortunately, from my perspective, often the person I first needed to convince was not the person that held the purse strings. And I would find myself in a position where I would either be volunteering to talk on their behalf to the higher people that did have the purse strings, or quite often equipping the teacher with the materials and the knowledge they would need to go and argue for the funding. So it sometimes will be one step removed. And as Phil said, that comes down to having a sales team that really understand what's happening in the school, understand the people that they're talking to, and how best to support them.
Did you find, Steve, that, and this may or may not be relevant for what you're talking about there, but were trials or demos of the solutions something that you needed to do? Were they effective to actually prove and evidence the impact of the solutions that you're taking into those schools?
Most definitely, yes. And that comes back to what Phil said. Most of my career was a physical product, so we really did need people on the ground who could, receive the imports, deliver them to schools, install them, train and support. So all of that side required somebody on the ground, but it almost always began with a physical demonstration. In the old days, that was literally me getting on an aeroplane and going out there and doing it. Nowadays, you would tend to do that probably more online, certainly at an initial level. So that comes back to that whole idea of webinars and things. Trials of physical hardware was difficult, but a lot of my clients obviously are software-only solutions, and trials are a very good way of going if you use them correctly. If you just give somebody a trial code, let them go and never speak to them again, it's probably going to fail. Trials need to be closely handheld, lots of support, lots of encouragement along the way, and making sure that it's a successful trial.
Exactly. Have you had similar experience with that, Ian? Because I know obviously we've both worked in hardware and software previously, and obviously the hardware is a challenge when you're looking at international schools, but trialing and demos?
Yeah, I think I'd echo what Steve said. I think trials have got a very important part to play, but they have to be managed. Some quite tightly in terms of time, but some may need a couple of terms. So I think just taking a step back, that comes down to what everybody has said so far is knowing your customer, know what challenge you're addressing, and knowing who the key stakeholders are within the organization. Now, everything we've said today, if it's on a school by school basis. If you blow that up to a group, then you've got a lot of potential key stakeholders to manage. But I certainly think trials have got a place, but they need to be very well managed, to Steve's point. I think knowing what, or being clear about what successful outcome looks like for both sides, because if you don't, if you just do give stuff away willy-nilly, then it has no value. And so people don't act upon it. If I may just come back a step as well to what we were just talking about around interaction with schools, a lot of people will turn up at an event that's full of head teachers and expect those head teachers to be coming to talk to them about everything that they do. Well, actually, more often than not, and increasingly, head teachers either don't know, don't understand, or aren't interested in what you've got to say. And so being careful about what events you're attending and what your expectations are of them, because it becomes, it becomes quite a fractious situation where you've got a bunch of exhibitors who are desperate to speak to their teachers who don't want to speak to them because they aren't the right people. So I think, and again, coming back to something I said earlier, using ISC data to understand who the right point of contact is in that school and whether they are going to that event, or just knowing who they are for when you get that 30-second opportunity to talk to that head teacher over a beer, over lunch, or whatever. And I think it isn't a case of rock up at an event with a booth and convince the head teacher to buy your product that's not even on their radar as an issue.
You touched on there in your response, one of the areas of obviously some schools part of groups. So you could be talking to one school that's part of a much bigger organisation, and that's a different opportunity in how you'd work around that. So I'd like to come around the group and ask for kind of pointers on how you'd establish a strategy for working with school groups. Can I come back to you on that one, Ian, just following up from what you started there in that response?
Yeah, sure. And it certainly depends on the group and the scale. I think I've lost count of the amount of companies that just decided they were going to target gems. That's their strategy. I saw a comment from somebody in the notes there about schools getting inundated with inquiries. Well, I bet you gems do, because everybody goes for gems first. Comes back to a lot about what Phil was saying. Work out what your proposition is. Work out who you know in that group, because it might not be the head of every school. It might be a head of curriculum, might be a head of primary, a head of secondary. Work out what your engagement strategy is for each of them. Once you get, if you know somebody, brilliant. I think we all know people in all of the groups at certain schools. If you get that person and you get that person on board, then it's much easier to leverage off that. Even some of the biggest groups, you can start at not quite at the bottom, but you can start with a school and build out from there, because you've got something that's demonstrable, that you can leverage, that makes a difference, that somebody's bought into. And as far as heads in other schools of the group are concerned, somebody else has done the hard yards in improving it. I think it's very difficult to just go to one of the big school groups and hope to negotiate a whole group deal from scratch with no kind of market presence already. So it is about finding those advocates that you can talk to who will help you build that momentum around your product.
So, Ian, I will move on now and try and go back into the person from the large group. So your input on that, Phil?
Yeah, I'm laughing because I was that person at Gems for quite a long time when a bunch of products would come across my desk. And I have seen a few products come in and get that group deal, but not without a lot of blood, sweat, and tears, and a real sort of lengthy process to go through. So it's rare. What I would say is the top-down, bottom-up approach is critical. And again, even though it might be daunting and it's really complex with a big school group and they're all different, you have to invest time and capability in constructing that power interest matrix, finding out who the decision makers are, where to start. The most successful deals in big groups that I've seen over the years are where the strategy has been to go one school at a time, create advocacy, and get to a critical mass of 3, 4, 5, 6 schools where they're paying kind of full price for a product. And then corporate office start to take notice. And they say, hang on, we should have a framework agreement here. There must be something we can do. If those schools are bought into this, why not all schools? And at that point, you can start having a much stronger conversation around that. But again, it comes down to knowing the customer. And when it's a really complex customer, you just don't know. So, and it also comes back to this distribution of leadership. So in a big group, when it comes to teaching and learning products that don't touch on real management and finance and how the whole group operates. When it's about education, the schools are key, and they're the kingmakers. And that could be the principals. Principals that tend to be very powerful because the school group has appointed them. And if they have distributed leadership really well, then the real decision makers in those schools could be heads of department, they could be assistant principals, they could be teachers, because a good head of department will go to their teachers and they'll come to a consensus. So it's hard work, and starting at the bottom, but keeping the top warm when it comes to it is critical.
I think you highlight quite nicely there the complexities that you were touching on earlier, and how important it is to have a plan and a strategy for how you approach these sales. And it's not a quick win, but it's definitely worth it in the long run. Anything else from your side, Steve, to add into that with working with groups?
Well, I would say one of the things, if I'd sort of relay something that happened to me many years ago, I was doing a very small conference actually in Dubai, and it was being held within one of the international schools there. And quite by chance, the head of the science department wandered past the exhibition on the way to her staff room, and stopped to look at my stuff and told me that she was actually just about to buy my competitor's product. But having seen my stuff, she quite liked the look of it and wanted to know more. So we had a further conversation, and she went and basically bought a whole pile of my kit, which was great. And obviously she was part of a much larger group, which will remain nameless. But what happened was about 6 weeks later, she said, really getting on well with this. We, every term, all the heads of science from all of the schools in the group get together for a couple of hour catch up. Would you be interested in coming along and doing a little presentation to them? Oh, you bet you. I was on the very next plane out there. And that led to quite a few sales to other schools within the group. Now, I never got to the point where there was a group purchase, if you like, but I saw the group as a really good way to network and to grow within that group. So no, didn't get the one big deal, but did manage to get to a lot of the schools through the advocacy and the word of mouth. And that, I think, is the power of the school groups that most companies can tap into fairly quickly.
Absolutely, and a great example there of how powerful advocacy is in the international school space, particularly within a school group structure.
I think, sorry, I'm just going to add to that as well. I think that advocacy, that network, those relationships that we talk about are much easier to generate if you're focused on specific parts of the world.
Yeah.
So I think one of the common misconceptions is you can buy the data and just blitz every school in the world and you'll be successful. Well, guess what? You don't get to know enough about the territory that you're in, or the circumstances that your groups are operating in, because a lot of the groups will be around a region. The more you can demonstrate empathy with what's happening in that particular part of the world, the easier it is. If you're a small, well, even a larger company, devoting your resources to conquering the world from a standing start is likely to fail, because you need, for me, to focus on a region or a type of school. If you're going to go for groups, to understand the workings of a group. But yeah, I just think that if you've got the ISC data for Asia and you're going for parts of Asia, then it's much easier to target those through using that and events around that. So sorry, I just wanted to make that point around focus.
No, it's a really good point, Ian. And I think, think about your same approach in the UK. When I've worked at startups in the UK, I've started on my doorstep, which is, Birmingham schools. They're there. Even, you wouldn't go out and say, I'm going to target the school in John O'Groats when I've got 400 on my doorstep here in Birmingham. And it's the same with the world, isn't it? It's tempting as it is to go out there with a huge opportunity. It's critical to really hone in on an area to really work that. Following on from that then, so what are some of the most common mistakes that education suppliers make? Can I come to you for that, Steve?
Gosh, I think the number one, and then probably to what Ian was just saying, Don't take the ISC database and just mass market to everybody with a blanket email. I come across so many companies that tell me we did that and nothing happened. Well, what a surprise. You really need to drill down. You need to understand the area you're going into. You need to segment, and that could be by region, it could be by school group, it could be by subject area, it could be by the person you're targeting. You know, if you were targeting the head of science, you'd have a very different message to the bursar, for instance. So you really need to segment down. And just looking at one of the questions that just came in, should we do email or phone call? My strongest advice is if you've got the resources, and that's something you need to think about before you get into this, it's both. I would always work on small emails going out every 2 or 3 days, 30 or 40 at a time at the most. I'd be watching for open rates, and then I'd be getting on the phone and trying to communicate with the people that have opened and shown interest. It's not easy. It's easier than trying to talk to a UK teacher on the phone, but it's still difficult and getting more difficult by the minute because people are getting more and more inundated. But if you can get a phone conversation with a teacher or a bursar, whoever it is you're in for, your chances of success grow exponentially above that of just an email. I would also say that you put everything together in a campaign. You don't just send out emails. You have a target in mind, be that a webinar or a trial or something, and you use social media at the same time to promote what it is you're doing. You try and build a campaign that's a multimedia campaign, not just one or the other.
Yeah, you want that call to action, don't you? That's driving them to something where you're sharing insights or thought leadership, as you mentioned earlier, and really building your brand with the
Yeah.
international schools.
I think just one
Thanks.
thing to add, it's not
Yeah,
just one email either. You know, if you're doing a campaign, it's a series of emails, you know, that are leading somebody towards something. So yeah, there might be a free download. Then there's a call to action that says, why don't you come to the webinar or whatever? But that's a series of emails, not just a one hit and hope it
one-off.
works.
Thanks for that, Steve. Phil, what would be your advice, common mistakes that suppliers make?
I think there's consensus on this, isn't there? We work with at EdV, we work with ISC because we believe that that data is the foundation, and you have to leverage that. You have to go in and create your own profile of each customer, each group, each country, and so on that works for your product. And one of the biggest mistakes is diving in to those sales conversations, the demos, pitches, marketing activities without the requisites personalized intelligence and mapping that way through and knowing what each potential customer really wants. And you have to have those coaching conversations to build that picture, the profile of each potential customer. And you know, again, I've seen too many salespeople thrown to the wolves without that data. They're not empowered. So when you look at the sales and marketing teams, sometimes there's conflict there within organizations as well. And the biggest mistake is not those teams not working closely enough. That it's almost like a national intelligence service where you get the combined services, but they're actually competing against each other rather than coming together, sharing intelligence and using that to craft a blended strategy, a coherent strategy between them. So salespeople out in the field are properly equipped and empowered with the right data to go about their jobs and be successful.
Thanks, Phil. Anything to add from mistakes-wise, Ian?
I've just made a couple, really, a couple of notes. Focus, undoubtedly, for me, is first three of the top five in focus. Just know what your story is, know what markets you're selling to, and focus on those. So the other couple that I had, which aren't quite as big, but the mistakes that are made every day. One is around localization or lack of it, I should say, and that is that well, my product works in the UK, therefore it will work in Thailand and it'll work in Abu Dhabi. And particularly, you know, I'm an American company. My American product will work in these parts of the world. It's very so that localization of the product, but also the services that go around it. You know, the fact that your market might be 8 hours ahead of you, but your support desk doesn't change. So you've got to accept that if you're dealing with a different part of the world, that there are different. So when people talk about localization, they often just think it's language. It's not language. It's everything else that services that market. And the other mistake, I think, is that there's a quick buck to be made. And people dip their toe in, they go to an event and say, it's not for me. International won't work for us. It's not a quick buck. There are things that you can do to accelerate it, but you have to commit to it. You have to give yourself time to be successful and for the market to build trust with you, and for you to be known. I'm done, I think, with that. So sorry.
No,
I would
great.
echo that, though, Ian, and just say that that's where the resilience part comes in, right? Giving up too early. It's the Thomas Edison thing, right? How many people failed just as they were on the cusp of
exactly.
success?
Yeah. So we've got a few questions come in. So I'm going to actually go across and pick up on the questions now, just conscious of time. First one in actually is from one of our field researchers who obviously spends a lot of time in schools, interviewing leaders in international schools. And the feedback she's found is that it can often feel overwhelmed by so many products in the market. So what advice do panelists have for them? Can suppliers do something about this, or is it an internal issue that schools need to resolve themselves? Can I come to you for that one, Phil?
I think being that critical friend, getting in and supporting the schools to help them navigate the market without pushing your own product. Again, it comes to that point around offering something beyond your product, being credible in the market, and having something additional to offer, showing that you understand the business. Sharing competitor analyses in a non-threatening way, helping with coaching around school improvement, looking at school improvement plans. If you can afford it, or if you can, in-house or outsourcing it, can you bring high-level leaders in to do that school review with the schools and then feed back on that to give you and it comes back to profiling your customers to say, these are the real priorities. These are the challenges this school or this group or this ministry is facing. And then you have a better idea of whether your product is going to fly or not. And if not, get out, focus elsewhere.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for that, Phil. So a recent conference over in the States, and I think that question was brought into sharp focus for me when they were looking at school apps. And there are hundreds, I'm sure you're aware, hundreds of apps out there in the market, and quick multiplication up of 15 minutes to assess each app. And there's not enough hours or days in the week. And how can we aggregate that across the sector and really support schools to go through that? Another quick question we've got here. So a question from Donna. As a charity resource provider, the marketing budget is limited. Currently been successful selling to 16 countries, but purely through Facebook teacher forums for mainly UK-based schools. As a wellbeing PSHE resource, is there a best area to focus marketing to? Can I come see you for that, Ian?
Hi, Donna. I think it's Donna Hill that I know. Well done on getting to 16 countries already. That's great. I think, do you mean a geographical perspective? Because I know of businesses that are already working from a well-being and PSHE perspective, both in the Middle East and in Asia, very well. There is a requirement that needs addressing. And so I think the world is wakening up to well-being from both a pupil and a school perspective, and a teacher perspective, but also PSHE. So I think that for me, the market's maturing anyway. Happy to have a chat offline if that helps. But the people are already doing that successfully in those markets. So I think less so Latin America, and the US, from what I've seen, is very congested.
Agree. The only thing I'd add to that for Donna is, if you're looking to do it cost effectively, I would say probably the easiest route would be through social media, probably X, as a way of trying to get your message out there without having to spend an absolute fortune on marketing.
Yeah, I'd agree. Sorry, I would just add,
No,
Rachel, that just for Donna's benefit, it sounds as though, I don't know if you've hit a block, some sort of block in the road there, but getting into 16 countries is impressive, and it sounds like you might have done that through being in the right communities at low cost if you have a limited marketing budget. So being in those communities, whether it's a Facebook group or WhatsApp group or some sort of forums, is a really powerful way. So if it's working, more of the same. Just find out what works in different countries and get in there and be bold and not necessarily control the narrative in those groups, but add value.
Excellent. Thank you. I'm just going to wrap up with one last question because it links to one of the sessions earlier today where Sammy gave an update on growth in Saudi. So the question is, any experience working with Saudi Arabia international schools and the growth opportunities there? I'll come to you first,
That's got to be
Steve.
Phil. No, I think that's got to be Phil.
I'll go to you then, Phil.
How long have we got? It's a huge country. So, yeah, there's a huge difference between the public sector and the private sector, obviously. But the private sector is starting to really grow now. It's much easier to get into Saudi than it was, say, 5 years ago, even 3 years ago, but it's still a challenge. It comes back to building relationships, getting there on the ground, face to face, drinking lots of coffee, building trust, getting a partner who already has those connections and has that trust on the ground is really important. And finding out where people have already been successful in which areas. And again, without wanting to sort of hammer the point too much, building the customer profiles. What are the real needs? Who are the decision makers? And what's the map to get to them?
Indeed.
Yeah,
and I think it's been changing so rapidly in Saudi, hasn't it? But it's definitely a country where you do have to be on the ground and building those relationships. Were you going to add in there, Steve?
I was just going to say, obviously, Phil's experience in Saudi is immense. What experience I have in Saudi has always been to state schools, and that's always been via centralized tenders. So I don't think there's a market to state schools individually in Saudi.
Well, I'm conscious of time. I think we could actually carry on chatting all afternoon. So I just want to say thank you to everyone who's joined us on the session today and indeed joined any of the sessions over the last 2 days at the conference. A huge thank you to my panel, Steve, Phil and Ian, for your support today. Great insights. I'm sure people have found those very valuable to help them navigate the markets. If we haven't got around to answering your questions, we've got your contact details and we will follow up with you. As I mentioned before, all the recordings are in ISC community, so do log into there. And if you do have any other further questions, feel free to contact the team. You can get us through inquiries@iscresearch.com. So thank you to all of our presenters over the last 2 days and everybody for joining us. And we look forward to speaking with you soon. Thank you.
Thank you.
I've just shared the link for the discussion forum in the chat. So if you do think of any further questions, then feel free to jump on there and continue the discussion. And thank you everyone for joining us today. The recording will be up just momentarily. Thank you.
Thank you, India. Thanks,
Thank you.
Bye. Bye.
That's right.